Welcome to another edition of Maverick University. I'm your host, David Hallberg. Joining me today is Pastor Joe Grimaldi, the pastor of First Baptist Church of Kenmore in Akron, Ohio. And thank you so much for being with us, Pastor Grimaldi.
Joy to be here.
Yes, sir. Want to talk to you a little bit about your ministry experience. You've been in ministry, you said pastoring for 40-something, or ministry 40-something.
43 years.
43 years.
Yeah.
And
The first 7, I was an assistant.
okay.
Yeah.
And then the rest of that, you had pastored in Pennsylvania for some time, started a church in Minnesota, and now pastoring in Ohio. And you even mentioned helped start several other churches
Yes.
as you were a pastor in one of those churches. And so I want to address the issue of the second man, the assistant pastor. You were in that role, and now you have been a pastor and have had several men hired by you to serve in that role for you.
Sure.
And I just want to talk a little bit about what the second man is, especially maybe if you could direct your comments maybe to a young man who
Sure.
is just getting into it, a young man who's entering Bible college and may end up in that situation after graduating Bible college and going into ministry. What are the things that you wish you could tell all second men, and the things that maybe you did tell all your second men? So could you
Sure.
give us a little bit of your background
Sure.
as a second man and then as a pastor?
Sure. Well, let me first say that I think my philosophy as a pastor about second men is probably quite a bit different than most pastors I know.
Okay.
And I'll say here's why it's different.
Okay.
I have told everybody that's ever worked for me as a second man, I want you to come here for 2 to 5 years. I don't want you to stay more than 5 years. I want you to come, and I want to help you get to the next stage of what God has for you. If you feel like you're going to be a second man for life, this is not the place for you. You need to
Okay.
be somewhere else. I don't want someone forever. While you're here, you're going to help this ministry, and then we're going to help you develop you for your next ministry.
Got it.
So while you're here, I'm going to try to help you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to analyze your strengths and weaknesses and figure out how to maximize your strengths and to build up your weaknesses so they're not weaknesses.
Got it.
I'm going to try to teach you how to do everything I do in church, every single thing. Before you leave, you're going to do a funeral. Before you leave, you're going to serve communion. Before you leave, you're going to baptize. Before you leave, you're going to do a wedding. Before you leave, you will do everything that I've done. You'll make a budget. You'll plan a missions conference. You'll do it with me, and then at some point I'll say, now you do it and let me watch.
Okay, wow.
Let
That
me
is
watch.
definitely different from most churches,
Yeah.
where you basically set a time limit and say, your time's up, you're out the door.
Yeah.
And I was going to bring that up because just from my memory, I'm like, man, he's had a lot of second men. Either
Yeah.
they don't like working for this guy, or so that's the reason.
That's a part of it too.
Okay.
No. Well, yeah, it really is. I mean, Mike has stayed 5 years,
Okay,
and that's the longest assistant I've ever had.
really?
You
Okay.
know, yeah, five years, and everybody else has been 2, 3, 4 years, something like that.
And that's by design.
That's by design.
Okay.
It's by design. And I said all that to say that, you know, as a second man, I was a second man for 7 years, but I was at my home church as a second man, but under 2 different preachers.
Okay.
I was 2 years under one guy, and then 5 years under the second guy, and then I became the pastor. So some of the things I would tell them is, number one, you need to understand how to be supportive of your pastor. You need to be able to understand it's his ministry and not yours. You have a ministry, but it's his ministry. Your only authority is the authority he has invested into you or given you. And you need to always be respectful of that. And my guys, knowing that they're going to be here 2 to 5 years, they never have designs on really feeling completely like this is their ministry and not mine. This is where you get the splits where an assistant takes over.
Yeah.
My guys have always known, you know, I'm just a pilgrim passing through this place.
Yeah,
you
and
know.
people's loyalties aren't going to that man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, which brings up the fact that, okay, to be supportive to your pastor, you know, I'm the guy that I take compliments and criticisms equally the same. When I'm done preaching and people say, that was a great sermon preacher, I say, praise the Lord, praise the Lord. It really means nothing to me. I think they need to do it for them,
Sure, yes.
but I don't need to hear it. I listen almost every week to my sermon. It's on live stream now. I'll go watch it, sometimes Sunday night. I'll watch it, and I analyze what I'm doing. Even after all these years, 43 years, I'm still looking at it. I want to see what I did right, what I did wrong. Quite often I'll look at what I think was the best sermon, and when I listen to it and watch it, I think, it wasn't that good. And then I take the worst
Yeah.
one. I think, oh, that was really a flop. And I look at it and I say, you know, it wasn't that bad. So quite often my impression from the pulpit is quite different than what it is. But from a second man's perspective, you know, you need to compliment the pastor. You need to tell him, preacher, appreciate that message. That was a good message. A lot of preachers need that encouragement. I realize most people aren't like me. You know, when I preach in conferences, I'll tell the other preacher after he preached, that was a good message. At football camp, when my friends and people preach, I always find them and say, man, God bless you. That was a good sermon.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Because sometimes they feel a little insecure about that sermon, and they just need someone to encourage them. The second man needs to do that. You need to understand that you are the Aaron, you are the Hur, you're holding up the hands, and that's a big part of your job. You need to be positive. The preacher doesn't need to hear negativity all the time. You need to be early. I can't stand it when second men are late. I'm an early guy. If you tell me to meet you at some time, I'm an hour early. I was over an hour early today. I sat in on classes.
Yes, sir.
It's just who I am. I can't stand being late. When you're late, you're insulting my time. My time's not important to you. Our ministry's not that important to you. You just show up or at the very last minute. If you're not 15 minutes early, you're 15 minutes late.
Yep.
Show up early. Be prepared. Oh, man. I hate it when I give a task and I tell you, you're going to run this meeting for VBS. And we've gone over it for weeks in meetings. And, here's the door guards, and here's the altar workers, and here's the food prep people, and here's the craft people, and here's all these different things. Okay? I've got all these lists of this stuff, and we go over all this. And here's the workers' requirements and what their responsibilities are in all these categories. I want you to look at this, and then you're going to run the meeting. And you walk into the meeting, and you're like, well, who wants to be a door guard? Well, okay. If you're not prepared, well, I'll tell you what I do. What I do is I'll say, okay, Brother Hallberg, and I'll stand up and take over the meeting because you just blew it.
Yeah.
Now, you're going to hear about that because it really upset me that you weren't prepared. We've talked about this for weeks. I spent more time preparing for your meeting than you did. See, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Because if anything, as an assistant, I was always prepared. I don't want the preacher to have to do my work. If he's doing my work, why does he need me? Why does he need me? Now, he needs to teach me and show me, and I'm going to teach you, and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to help you. But you better put the effort in and show up prepared. Show up early, show up prepared, show up with a positive attitude. Be sensitive to the preacher's family. A lot of preachers out here, most churches are little churches, and their family is overworked. They're doing everything at the church. The pastor's wife, you need to yank her out of there, and you're the young guy, and your family's the young family. You need to get in. The old lady doesn't need to be in there for hours
Let
after.
me take that over.
Hours after the meal cleaning up. You need to tell her, oh, Mrs. Preacher, you go home. Let me take care of that. Let me do that. And what you don't ever want to do is, oh, you want to do that? Sure, that'd be great. Let the preacher and his family do it, and you just back off.
Yeah.
Because to be honest with you, most preachers and their family, they'll step up and do it. They're used to doing that. We'll just do it.
Yeah, it's by nature.
As an assistant, if my preacher was out turning a wrench on a bus, I failed. If he was fixing a light socket, I failed. If there was something that he should not have needed to be doing, and by the way, maybe you're not qualified. Preacher, let me get somebody to do that. I'll find somebody to do that. But I need to make sure to take the burden off of him. He really needs to give himself to prayer and the ministry of the word. And I need to try to make sure that happens as an assistant. And some assistants don't get that. I'm always trying to push the people toward the preacher. If I go to your house as a member to visit you, hey, the preacher wanted me to come by and see you. I go to the hospital to make a hospital call. Hey, the preacher asked me to come by and see you. I call you on the phone.
Yeah.
Hey, the preacher wanted me to call you and see if you could help with this project at church. The preacher did the preacher. Because when it's, hey, I wanted to see if you'd be involved in this. I wanted to see how you were doing. Now all of a sudden, I'm telling you, I'm in charge. I want to make sure you always know the preacher's in charge. The preacher's in charge. The preacher's in charge. I'm always making sure that I do that. Go ahead.
I have a question. Back you up. You were
Sure.
talking about your first assistant pastoral position, 7 years under one pastor, and then 5 years under another pastor.
Two and five.
2 and 5, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And so you were talking about being supportive of the pastor. I can imagine this could be a challenge for some people. You were just invested 2 years with one man, and now you have a new boss come in.
And I was
you knew probably more than that pastor did initially.
I was the chairman of the pulpit committee
Okay.
to bring the next guy in.
Yes.
And both of these guys are pastor in the church that I grew up in from the time I was 5. I watched this building.
So these are the Johnny-come-latelys.
I watched this building being built.
Yes.
Yet you have to be able to bite your tongue a lot of times. Look, there's no doubt that there's things that every one of my assistants knows that I don't know, that they're better at than I'm at. I mean, almost every one of my assistants Brother Hallberg knew more about music than I did. But there's no doubt I'm in charge of the music.
Yes, sir.
No doubt about it. And there's times where I may be technically, musically, making an error in the way I'm doing something with that music, and you need to be able to say, if that's what you want, we'll do it. And as an assistant, there were times when the preacher would say something. I'm a pretty good handyman. I mean, I've helped build houses. I'm mechanical. Most of my preachers, the two guys I work for, neither one of them. The one didn't know how to use tools, and the other one didn't own any. But there were times when they'd say, we need to have that light, we move that light switch, put it on that side of the door, do this or that. I'm thinking, okay, that means we have to knock out the drywall, drill holes through. The only way to move that there is to do. I'm thinking that is not technically possible. And I would look at them and say, if that's what you want, I'll do it, preacher. And after a while, they got used to saying, is that a bad idea? I said, well, let me tell you why it is a bad idea. I came to church one Wednesday night, and we had these big chandeliers. They had a 300-watt bulb on the bottom and 10 bulbs in them and a big cover. The cover was off. The bulbs were bare, glaring at you, and the bottom big bulb we had, this was back in 81. The bulb is swinging, hanging by wires. The preacher tried to fix that before church. He got on a ladder. Ooh. And I'm sitting in church, and the whole time I'm thinking, my preacher should not have been on a ladder trying to fix that. I missed it. I missed the fact that chandelier wasn't working right. He doesn't know what he's doing, and he made a mess of it. When church was over, I sent my wife home, and we lived pretty far away. Yeah. And I stayed and tore that thing all apart, rewired the whole thing because he messed it up, put it together. When he came in Monday morning, that chandelier was fixed. And he said, when did you do that? I said, I did it last night. I said, preacher, I'm sorry. He said, sorry about what? I said, I'm sorry that you ever even had to touch that. You should have never even had to touch that. That was my responsibility. Open your eyes and see what's around. I hate it when I drive into a church and there's an assistant pastor and I see the pastor out in the driveway or out in their yard picking up trash.
Yep.
How did you drive by that and not see that? How did you go in there and not notice that? And he's out there picking up trash? Look, when you're concerned for all of those little things, you're taking all these little burdens, all these little problems. The preacher should never, if you're an assistant, the preacher should never have to open and close the building. You say, but he comes before me. Well, then come earlier. He's going to stay later. Then you close everything up and say, preacher, that everything's closed up. The door's already locked. When you walk out, it's done. Just shut the light off. You take care of it. Don't overburden him. Show that you're going to work. Be creative with new ideas, but communicate. This is a great thing. I always like my young guys come up with ideas. I don't have to do it the same way. There was times when Micah would come up with an idea, and I would let him do it when I knew it wasn't going to work, because I knew that the only way he would figure this out is if I let him fail at it.
Yeah.
Now, inside of a controlled environment.
Sure.
But then there were a couple ideas he had, and I thought, this is not going to work. It's not going to be good. I said, okay, let's try that. And it was a great success. And then I'd have a meeting and say, you know what? I have to tell you, I thought for sure that would fail, but you were right, and that actually worked. The old dog learned a few new tricks along the way.
Yeah.
But he was creative enough to try to come up with new ideas. It's no wonder when he takes over a ministry, he redesigned all their tracks. He's brought them into a modern era with all kinds of electronics and things. That's because he worked under a guy for 5 years. It gave him as a pastor, I don't want to stifle your creativity, but as an assistant, you better not try to allow your creativity to override me like you know everything and you're God's gift to this because you've done it for 6 months. And I've been doing it 43 years.
So if you've got those creative juices flowing, you always funnel it through the pastor. What do you think?
Yeah, preacher, what do you think about this? What about that? Hey, preacher, do you think we could try this? What do you think about that? And by the way, don't be shocked if the preacher takes all the credit for the idea. And that's fine with me. The truth is, that's the way I wanted it.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the ghostwriter of his novel. I wanted to be the guy behind the scene. I needed him to get the credit. That didn't bother me.
Yeah.
And by the way, once I became a pastor, what I realized was not only did he get the credit, but he always got the blame. As an assistant, I was floating free. I didn't realize when I became a pastor how much blame would be put on me.
So a lot of assistant pastors out there are a little disgruntled maybe because the pastor's getting some credit, but they would be much better if they just, mind their own business and understand the pastor takes the blame too.
Let them have
when they deserve it.
Let them have the credit and the blame.
Yeah. Wow.
Let them have the
There's
credit.
There's two sides to every coin.
Yeah. And another thing is, finances, money. Let me say this real quick. A lot of times assistant pastors gripe and moan about how much money they're making. Oh, I made more. And they say little things like, I made more money when I was working at the truck place. I made more money. I was doing this. Made more money. Can I tell you how much of a sacrifice a lot of us, when I first got into the ministry, this has been a long time ago, I realize, talking about 1981, but I made $110 and no benefits of any kind. I had to scrape, borrow, and beg to try to make a living, but I was full-time. They let me use the church kitchen as my office, but I had to find my own desk and my own chair. And there's a picture of me at this little desk I bought at a flea market for $5, a chair and a little bookshelf. And I drove a nail and hung my coat on it. And my wife came to the door and called me, and I turned, and she took a picture. And that's me at 21 or whatever I was in my first office.
Yeah.
But I was in the ministry, and I never one time complained about the money. Never once. Never wanted to. Sometimes an assistant pastor lives in a house that has housing, utilities, all this stuff, but he never sees that as money.
Oh, yeah, all that's provided for him.
Exactly.
Living in some kind of parsonage
and
or
I
whatever.
always think to myself, you know what? What we should do is pay you the money and make you pay all your own utilities and pay rent. Then you'd understand it's money, that it's real hard money.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, when it doesn't pass through your hands, you just don't view it as such.
But a part of this for me is, man, I always thought it was an honor to be in the ministry. Sometimes I look at the pastor and they say, oh, but he's got all these benefits. He's got this. Yeah, do it for 43 years. I'm doing this for 43 years, and the truth is I'm still below the mean of what people in my city make. You know? And if I had any job in the secular field, I'd have made more. But the assistant doesn't see that. Assistant pastors want to go somewhere where they're full-time. Do you know, when our church had money issues, I was so proud of the assistant I had at the time. And just not to besmudge anybody else, I won't call names, but he came to me and said, I'll get a regular job if you want me to, preacher, and still do all my duties here. You won't have to pay me.
Wow.
He offered to give up his salary. I didn't do that. Now, we all took cuts, and we've done that several times. We all took cuts in our pay, and then when the money came back, we got back to where we were supposed to be.
Yep.
But he was willing to do that, and I admired that.
That's
I admired
tremendous.
that greatly. So, there's so many little things. Be silent about all his faults. You don't ever want to be griping about the preacher's faults, especially to your wife. Don't get her in a negative pattern about the preacher and about the services. Be complimentary. Go home and say to your wife, wasn't that a good sermon? Boy, wasn't that a good message? Wasn't that a great truth the preacher brought out?
Yeah, you're poisoning your own well.
When your wife needs some advice, she doesn't have a pastor. You've taken away her pastor. You're going to need a pastor to help you at some point.
Yep.
And when you want to come in with your wife and sit down because there's a serious problem, you've already degraded him so much that she won't respect him enough to listen.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that you're silent about. Now, I'm not talking about covering sin. We all know that there's all kinds of things that go on, and sometimes there's a time when you have to be able to step up and stop something that's sinful. Absolutely, no doubt about that. I'm talking about stupid stuff. If your preacher can't sing, don't mock him about that.
Yeah.
Don't make fun
That's
of that.
silly.
Try to protect him. Try to protect him from that. Don't allow him to get into a situation where he's going to have to lead the songs or do something.
Yep.
So make sure that you try to protect him. And I said this, and I'll say this last thing. Always be prepared. My wife had an appendix attack on a Saturday night driving back to our house. I literally had to drive out and pick her up on the side of the highway and rush her to the hospital.
Oh, wow.
And they decided to do surgery Sunday morning. I went to the hospital in my suit and tie with my Bible and my sermon. But I had told the assistant, you better be ready if I can't make it. There's no way I was going to leave my wife when she was having surgery. But the doctor said she's first thing. We'll do the surgery at 8 o'clock. It's a short surgery. She'll be out by 9. I know. I might miss Sunday school, but I'll be there by 11. Well, she got bumped. This one thing led to another. I didn't make it. They thought it was funny. They said, what are you doing in a suit and tie here to watch your wife have surgery? I said, I'm a pastor. As soon as she comes out and she's out of recovery, I'm running to the church to preach. Okay, well, I didn't do it. But you need to always be prepared. Always be prepared because things happen. Somebody calls and the preacher has to rush to the hospital on a Wednesday night. You better be prepared to do Bible study.
Yep.
The worst thing you can do is not be prepared. Be prepared to pray and preach and sing at all times. And that makes the preacher very comfortable to know this isn't the end of the world if I can't do this because somebody's here to take over.
You need to give your pastor a sense of confidence in you. That things can fall apart, and yet he can still make it happen.
And do it his way, even if you think there's a better way. Do it his way for a while. While you're there, I teach them how to outline. I have an order of service. We're going to do it this way. Now, when you go out of here, you do it your way. If you find a better way, that's great. And you know what usually happens? By the time they leave, they do it my way. Yeah, because after a while, they figure out why it's best.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Pastor Grimaldi. I'm
joy.
glad that you came in. And a lot of helpful stuff for not only for the young men. I think you may be helping some pastors who have some second men and how to train them and lead them and develop them into what God has them to be. So make sure that you check out our other episodes as well on our YouTube channel. But before you do that, make sure that you like this video and that you share it with somebody who will be benefited by it. And also make sure that you check out the podcast on the audio-only platforms as well. God bless you.